Welcome everyone to the MacAdmins Campfire sessions. I'm your host, Russell Myers, and I'll be moderating our Campfire sessions today. With me today are my MacAdmins conference team members, Chris Lawson producing and Josh Miller helping moderate the Q&A. Before we introduce you to today's camp counselors, a quick introduction to the team's live event interface. We will be using the Q&A feature in the team's live event. If you have a question for our presenters, please enter it into the Q&A there. At the end of the presentation, our host will ask the questions, me. If you're using social media and you would like to share any thoughts during the presentation, please use the hashtag PSUMac. At the end of our last presentation, there will be a link where you can provide feedback on the conference sessions and the presenters today. As always, this session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel at a later date. So today's first session is called Things I Learned from the Autopkg Maintainer by Anthony Reimer. Please give a warm camp welcome to Anthony.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm here with my 2016 MacAdmins water bottle. Last time I gave a virtual presentation of this conference. I'm looking forward to today's conference. Now, producers, can you see that second screen or not? Probably not.
I am not seeing your shared screen yet.
Okay. This may be because we rehearsed this on Monday, believe it or not. This may be because of my, share, lovely. There we go. Okay. Much better. Of course, it's not letting me share what I need to share. Let's try again. Okay, let's do this and see how it goes.
Yeah, we see some content now.
Yeah, except are you seeing the slides or my notes?
We're seeing the notes.
Okay, this is the issue we avoided on Monday, but okay. Let's see if I can kill that. Yeah, see, I can't actually see what I can share, which is different than our rehearsal. Oh, hey, there we go. Never mind. That better?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Excellent.
Much better. Okay. And yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here today. I do feel that before I start, I wanted to find a way to address the elephant in the virtual room. Strangely enough, not COVID-19. Thankfully, this morning, Tim Cook did that for me and for all of us. So if inclusion and diversity are topics that are important to you, I encourage you to join us in the diversity channel in the MacAdmins Slack. The slides and resources for my presentation today are already posted on my blog at the URL shown. I'll show this link again at the end of the presentation. As Rusty already said, use the Q&A function if you have any questions during the presentation, as soon as you think of them, because we've got a moderator collecting them. And in fact, if you're reminded of something that you've learned from the Autopkg developers and maintainers that seems apropos, add those comments in the Q&A as well. Happy to have everyone share today. To be clear, these are the things that I'm not discussing today, at least in any cohesive manner. If you do want to learn more about Autopkg in general, Greg Nagel's talk at last year's Mac Sysadmin conference is a fantastic starting point, particularly the first 20 minutes for those who are new. As well, there's a lot of good information in the Autopkg wiki, particularly this page shown that lists common blog posts and conference videos. If you're specifically interested in recipe writing, I also did a talk at last year's Mac Tech conference on the topic. It was recorded live, but the video has not yet been posted. I'm in the process of recording a narrated version of that presentation that I hope to make available sometime this month. It'll be posted to the GitHub repo shown on the screen alongside the other resources from the presentation that are already there. Instead, the format of today's topic was inspired by a recent quick talk by Armin Briegel on obscure terminal features, which also became a blog post and a Twitter thread. So in the same way, this talk is a bowl full of nuggets that I've learned from the maintainers of Autopkg. It's not as sharply focused as Armin's talk, but I hope you'll find some gold in what I have to share today. I've grouped the nuggets, if you will, into these 4 categories. Not all are specific to Autopkg, and some are more conceptual than technical. So even if you don't know Autopkg, I'm hoping you'll still find something that you can use. And of course, if you leave because it's not appropriate to you, I can't see you, so it doesn't matter. Here are the people who inspired today's content. A big thank you to all of them for the work they do in the open source community, not just in Autopkg. So let's start with our first category. Once you start working with an open source project or product like Autopkg in any sort of depth, you'll discover that things need to be fixed or enhanced. Often they'll be very small. For example, here are the 5 pull requests I've contributed to the Autopkg project, 2 of which edit prose and 2 of which fix minor typos. They're proof that anyone can give back to an open source project, because updating documentation and taking care of details is a useful contribution. But you'll see there are 6 PRs in this list. This one I've highlighted is closed. Here begins my learning number 1. I don't know about the rest of you, but I am not good at Git. Let me give you an example about how not to do a pull request. I decided to take the fork of an Autopkg pull request I'd previously created and use it as the basis of a new one. For a pull request that was intended to change literally 1 character, it had a lot going on. It had remnants of my previous PR. It had some work on an obscure bug that I ended up reverting. It then had to merge with the upstream master because my fork was woefully out of date before I applied that 1 character fix. Not surprisingly, this request sat without comment for 2 months. Then, as an outgrowth of a discussion in the MacAdmins Slack, I added some text to a processor description. I thought, I should just add it to my previous request. So I did, updating the title of the pull request to better describe the content of the request. And then the teacher appeared. Craig's guidance here is not only a good suggestion for open source projects, it's a good axiom for life. Less noise, more clarity. Keep separate items separate. Overall, just keep your PRs clean. Lesson number 2 is related to the rigor that Nick McSpadden brings to the table as one of the 2 most recent additions to the maintainer group. I've filed 2 PRs this year, one on the core recipes repo, one on the actual code base. Nick looked at both of them. Here's the story behind the most recent one. When a discussion in the MacAdmins Slack arose about how people commonly type the verb list repos instead of the correct verb repo list, it was suggested that Autopkg could accept both. I looked at the code for a few minutes, saw that the fix appeared to be simple, and thought, even I could PR this. So I did. But this pull request actually changed the function of Autopkg, unlike the prose and typo fixes I had submitted earlier. So Nick responded. Even though this was a simple change, he wanted to see sample verbose code runs. This is what he requested of everyone, actually, including the other maintainers. I'd run those tests anyway, so it was easy to do as asked. Similarly, if I'd been filing an issue with Autopkg, I would have had a handy template to fill in that would have provided the details the maintainers wanted. This is a win-win proposition. If you provide the details the maintainers need, it makes their job easier, making it more likely that your issue will be addressed, or maybe, just maybe, you will have the enjoyment of seeing one of your contributions listed in the release notes. The overarching theme, Make it as simple as possible for the maintainers to accept your request. Less work for them, a better product for everybody. And if you see something that could be better, put it on yourself to try to make it happen. The code was freely given to you. Give back when you can. Along that line, the next set of learnings are conceptual in nature, much more a way to think about Autopkg than a set of how-to tips. When we talk about recipes, we generally categorize them in a couple of ways. We describe them by function, what they produce, or what they do with what is produced. These are the nouns and verbs of Autopkg, if you will. And we describe their characteristics, how they relate to each other, and their technical function. Soon we may even be describing which markup language is inside. These are the adjectives of Autopkg. While those concepts may be useful to help you talk about Autopkg in a clearer, more literate way, that's not my learning for the maintainers. I go back to this thought that I learned from Greg Nagel, and I'm paraphrasing here. This is an idea that's particularly applicable when we are talking in adjectives. A child recipe is not a special type of recipe, it's a recipe that just happens to have a parent. An override is a kind of child recipe that, when created, has no function other than to customize input variables and, more recently, hold trust information. But could you add processor steps to it if you really wanted to? Absolutely, because it's just a recipe. Likewise, a stub recipe is meant to point at something else, whether that's a shared processor or a parent recipe. But can it be also used to change the default value of an input key in the parent recipe, like the core Autopkg recipes for Microsoft Office do? Absolutely. In that case, you have a separate recipe for Excel and Word that has no processor steps, but it makes it more discoverable. Conceptually, if you understand that they're all just recipes, not only does it demystify some of the aspects of how Autopkg works, it opens up new possibilities on how you can make it work. Another one of the things you saw right from the beginning in Autopkg was the use of custom processors and recipes to make the input variables simpler and more meaningful for potential users. If you're like me and can't code in Python yet, you can do a heck of a lot with the core processors and the processors others have written. But that often means that you have to document the heck out of what input values are acceptable because you don't have the ability to use sane defaults or do error checking. Either way, you are not only trying to make this automation simpler for others, you're also making it simpler for future you. So hide the complexity if you can, but document it when you can't. Even though you may observe that the Autopkg community is all about sharing, as it is, one must also realize that people who create Autopkg recipes make them to serve a particular need that they have. Sometimes that need is different than what you need. I'm thinking specifically of some of the post-processing one may need to do after a download. Autopkg is great at automating that kind of stuff, but maybe you need more or less customization than the original recipe author. It's also a community principle that we should avoid duplication of recipes where possible. So, what should you do when you need something different? First, you can build on the existing work by making a child recipe that either adds the additional steps you need or replaces a different child in the recipe chain. If you saw my 2019 Writing Recipes talk, I described one such example in detail in that talk. If you create a new child recipe and share it, I encourage you to mention the why of what you did in the recipe description so that others can decide whether they want to use yours or the predecessor. Also, if you see a way that your desired functionality can be added without losing any of the ability of the original recipe, then talk to the author or even do the work and make a pull request. The only caveat here is that the other author is going to have to support the changed recipe, so reaching out can help determine whether your change might be welcomed. But if all else fails, or if you need less or different functionality, sometimes you just need to build a new recipe for yourself. That's not ideal, but it's okay. As with the child recipe option, just document it so that others know why they would want to use your version over a different one. What you currently see on screen is an example of such documentation from the recipe description I showed a minute ago. So, if you try to understand the overall philosophy behind Autopkg, you can be much more zen when you encounter things that used to puzzle you. And remember as well, Autopkg is a sharing community. Just like I said before, give back when you can, even if that giving back is answering a question for a new user in the MacAdmins Slack. Finally, for those of you waiting for the technique portion of this presentation, congratulations, we have arrived. First, whichever plain text or code editor you use, there will be opportunities to automate or facilitate your recipe writing. Here's a couple things I've done with my configuration of BBEdit to help, mimicking some of the practices I learned from Elliot. One of the common processors I use is URL text searcher. I don't always remember the exact syntax of the arguments, so I generally look it up using the Autopkg processor info command, or I refer to an existing recipe that uses it. BBEdit has a feature called text clippings, where I can put any amount of boilerplate text in a file and ask for it to be inserted on demand. Here's a quick demo. Here's a new recipe. For the purposes of this demo, I'm going to use a recipe created by the new recipe verb, but you're more likely going to copy an existing recipe. You'll notice that the new recipe verb starts with a generic processor. That might be a useful thing to use while editing, so let's capture it as a clipping. I simply select it, use a contextual menu, or go to the clippings menu and select Save Selection as Clipping. I'll call it Generic Processor and put it in the set I've already created for Autopkg. Now I can place the insertion point at the beginning of the line and insert a clipping from the ones I've created. I can do it two ways. I can go to the clippings menu and select it from the menu, or I can use a contextual menu. As well, I can just start typing and BBEdit will offer to insert the clipping based on the clipping title. Pretty slick, eh? I'm posting my clippings to a public GitHub repo, so feel free to get a head start by grabbing mine and adding them to your BBEdit configuration or your favorite text editor. One of the things I really didn't consider much when writing recipes was adhering to standards. My recipes were legible, but since I borrowed from other recipes, sometimes indenting was done with spaces, sometimes with tabs, sometimes with both. It's better to have consistency for maintenance and support reasons, which is why there are now code standards if you're actually adding to the actual code base. You can apply standards with your recipes as well. First of all, you'll want to check that you haven't made any syntax errors in your recipe. You can check it with this command in terminal, but many pro text editors, like BBEdit, have syntax checkers for markup languages. In the paid version of BBEdit, for example, the HTML syntax checker will work just fine for Autopkg recipe purposes. That way, you can check your syntax without ever leaving the editor. Then you'll want to standardize the formatting of your recipe. Once again, the plutil command is your friend. It does a really nice job of cleaning up your recipe by standardizing indents with tabs and alphabetizing the dictionary at each level. But be aware that it will strip out any XML style comments. Again, your text editor may be able to process the file you have open in the foreground. BBEdit has text filters where you can create a script in any number of languages to act on the selected text or the whole document if there is no selection. In this case, if you create a shell script with the command shown on screen, you can apply this text filter as the last step in writing your recipe. Note that if there's a syntax error in your recipe, the conversion will fail, which obviously makes the syntax check a good idea, especially since, in my case, it's a single keystroke in BBEdit to make that check. One of my pandemic projects was to clean up my own recipe repo in the project. I followed the steps I just enumerated for all of my recipes. Sincere apologies to all who are using my recipes who then had to upgrade trust on all of your related overrides. Sorry, but it was necessary. I also deprecated some recipes with the recent deprecation warning processor, something I recommend you do for all your recipes that are no longer relevant or have been superseded. But one of the side effects of the cleanup is that the dictionary keys are alphabetized. To be honest, having the processor key at the end of the arguments is the closest I have ever come to understanding what people with dyslexia must go through. I struggle being able to read recipes this way. So my BBEdit text filter was a little different than what I showed previously. I used the substitution command sed to make processor come before arguments in the alphabet temporarily until the keys were sorted. To be clear, the shell command I've got on screen is entered as a single line in my script. I've added the backslashes shown in green to indicate this, but you don't type those if you are entering that on a single line. I will now do my MacAdmins duty and present the argument Elliot made to me about the benefits of sticking with the simple conversion version over my processor first version. Number 1, any recipes generated by Python's plist lib can be directly compared very easily since their dict ordering and whitespace are completely consistent. 2, recipes not created programmatically can be brought into alignment with plutil convert, no Python knowledge needed. And 3, like Python Black, which is that standard adopted for the Autopkg codebase, the adherence to a standard, even an imperfect one, allows focusing on function over form. End disclaimer. So, whatever you do, it would be beneficial if you did standardize your recipes in one of these ways. Certainly moving forward, leveraging the features of your text editor can make all of this better. This next tip is a more useful thing than you might think. Remember how I mentioned earlier that cleaning up recipes would strip out XML style comments? There is a workaround. If you create a key named comment, whether as part of the top level dictionary, like Recipe Robot does, or when you are describing what you are accomplishing with a processor in the process section of the recipe, it won't get stripped when you run your cleanup task. It also won't negatively affect the run. It'll basically be ignored. In fact, even the word comment is completely arbitrary. It could be anything not already in use, but it gets better. Back in March, the admin known as APIZ was writing a recipe that required running the file finder processor twice, but he needed to retain the output variable from each call for later use. After the second call of the processor, the first output variable was overwritten. Problem. So he went to Slack to ask for assistance. In the ensuing discussion, one of the developers pointed out that variable names are arbitrary. Otherwise, input variables wouldn't work. So why not define a new variable after the first file finder call and assign it the value returned from the first call? That new variable can now be used later for string substitution. Voila! Many minds were blown that day. And of course, because APIZ understands the Zen of Autopkg, he gave back by documenting this in the wiki so that everyone can learn about this, whether they were part of the discussion or not, whether they came to a talk like this or not. This next tip I learned from Tim. Tim is very succinct. In this case, the dot refers to the current working directory in your terminal session. Here's why that's important and how you can leverage it, especially if you were testing a new or modified recipe. Autopkg has a defined search order when it is looking for recipes. It checks the override directory or directories for recipes first. Then it uses the array of directories stored under the recipe search drs key in Autopkg preferences. When you add a repo using the repo adverb, or if you're an Autopkger, when you just check the name of the recipe, that repo is appended to the recipe search drs list. But take a look at the first two directories in the list. A recipe in the current working directory will get read before everything except an override. This is important in Autopkg because once Autopkg finds a match for the recipe requested, it stops looking. So search order is important. In previous talks, I've spoken about the special properties of the user's recipes folder, but never gave the technical reason behind it. This is the reason. You can leverage this knowledge when writing a new recipe or rewriting an older one. My current practice is to place any recipe I'm editing into my user recipes folder and set aside any overrides of the Autopkg so that Autopkg finds the version I'm editing first. But I could just as easily use any other directory as long as I make it my working directory using the cd command. While this feature dates back to the days before Autopkg had formal repos, you can still leverage it today. There are a lot of technical things I've learned from the people who wrote and maintained the code. I hope you can apply some of these in your work with Autopkg. I just want to finish up quickly by acknowledging Hannes and Elliot for not only raising awareness of possible issues with Autopkg, but doing something about it. Hannes's largest contribution was the addition of a code signature verifier processor in 2014. Whether a download might be compromised at the source or in transit, this check added a level of certainty that your recipes were fetching what was expected. Today, if you're writing a download recipe, it is expected that you will check for a code signature if one is present. Along the same lines, Hannes has also written a virus total analyzer post processor, which he makes available in his personal GitHub repo. That uses the virus total service to check for malware in an API. Elliot Jordan came to MacDevOps Vancouver in 2016 to give what ended up being a landmark talk on 15 different bad things you could do with Autopkg. I recommend viewing the 2017 MacAdmins conference version of the talk because by that point, Autopkg had implemented trust verification, which really helped address some of the things on that list in a systemic way. Greg Nagel also talks about security features in the second half of the talk I cited off the top. So with these two features, you can make your Autopkg implementation far more secure. Autopkg continues to thrive with more recipes being added every year. It is thanks to the developers and maintainers of the Autopkg project we have such a mature and valuable automation platform to work with and to extend. Thanks everyone for your attention. Once again, here's the link to all the slides and resources. And it looks like it's time. We still have a couple minutes for questions. Fantastic.
All right, so yes, please enter any of your questions you have in the Q&A, and we will read them off to Anthony. Thank you again for that presentation. Very informative. I learned a couple things myself.
And just so everyone knows, we're on like a 10-second delay here. So if you're just starting to ask your questions, we'll get to them. It'll just take, or even your like I said, the things you've learned that you might want to share.
Yep, we're open for that. We'll give it a couple seconds to see it trickle in, see if there's any Q&A. One of the things that I found pretty useful, Anthony, were the GitLab pipelines. When I commit a change to my repo, I have it do a poll and then run on those recipes. And then it tells me which ones have failed, if there's been any updates, and it gives me a nice little output of which ones I need to take a closer look at.
Yeah, I know when I get a failure message, what I generally do is I run a command that checks for. In fact, I even got a shell alias called verify trust that checks my recipe list and verifies it. And then when I find the exact ones, I just do verbose on those so I see the diff in the terminal. And it's a really good way to check what has changed.
Absolutely. We use it quite a bit here in addition to a custom processor we developed to import tasks into our Big Fix infrastructure for software deployment. So it's been great. Let's see, we've got a couple Q&As, succinct talk with lots of helpful resources. Just to confirm, we will be posting these in the YouTube channel in a little bit of probably a few days time, so it won't be immediately. And then we're going to post the link to Anthony's slides.
There we go. I'm just I'm just trying to repost it now. I've just put the, yeah. I'm just going to put that back on screen, except for some reason Keynote quit.
Okay.
Actually, I think it just crashed.
Yeah.
It's okay.
There
we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Let's put it up again. There we go. So there's the link to my slides. You can always reach me on Slack. As you can see on the link there, I'm Jazz Ace in the MacAdmin Slack. I'm Anthony Reimer on Twitter. You'll see me frequenting a bunch of channels, including Autopkg.
Excellent. Let's see. Any other final Q&A questions? Apologies if I missed this. How do you write a recipe that passes SSL verification so admins don't have to create an override?
I don't have an answer for that other than admins should always create an override. Actually, I think I know what they're getting at, but I'm not sure. So that's something. Literally take it to the Autopkg channel, because as I've learned, the developers and maintainers are in that channel, and they will answer questions. That's how I learned most of this stuff. Well, yeah. That's how I learned all of this stuff.
This might be a question on verification of a package or a disk image, and when I'm working on that, because I never remember the exact steps, I check out the Autopkg wiki, which has a page is precisely on finding the signatures for packages and disk images and apps, and that's my reference. So if that's the question, for like a download where you want to do a verification, that's where I would look to.
And if that is the case, you're right. The wiki has that. I've got it to the point where I actually have a shell alias that says codesig app and codesig package, depending on what I'm fetching. In other words, what I'm trying to figure out what is going to go into my Autopkg recipe for code signature verifier, so I don't have to remember. That's the way that I end up documenting it. And in fact, you might have seen in the snippets that I had for BBEdit, I now have a code signature verifier processor if it's an app and a code signature verifier processor if it's a package. Little snippet, so I know where I have to paste everything.
Another question: are all file wave recipes doable with Autopkg?
Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, I listed it on that last slide, that next to last slide, because there is a community of people supporting FileWave. It's well behind Monkey and JSS, but there's still plenty of recipes for it, and you can check that out. I think the FileWave channel would be a good one. I don't want to impinge on everyone's time because I know there's a break scheduled. Thanks everyone.